The German war machine feared one Allied weapon above all others, and it wasn't a tank or a plane, it was a heavy, clunky pipe that often broke the soldier who fired it. Imagine, for a moment, standing inside a formidable Panther tank in the summer of 1944. As a German commander, your senses are heightened, searching the ruins of an Italian town or the hedgerows of Normandy for the telltale sign of an enemy tank hunter. If an American GI fires his bazooka, you get a blinding flash and a long white smoke trail pointing directly back to his position. A British anti-tank cannon creates a significant muzzle blast. These visual cues are your primary defense, telling you precisely where to direct your turret and fire your MG-42 to silence the threat. But then, an impact strikes with absolutely no warning. There is no flash, no smoke, no muzzle signature, just a muffled thud, instantly followed by the terrible sound of metal being violently shredded and the catastrophic stench of fire. Your tank is immobilized and burning, and you have zero visibility on where the shot originated. You've just been hit by a ghost. This phantom weapon wasn't a sophisticated German secret project. In fact, to the Canadian soldiers tasked with carrying it, it looked more like a spare piece of plumbing salvaged from a construction site. This is the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, or the PIAT. On paper, the PIAT was a nightmare for its user. It was excessively heavy, incredibly awkward to maneuver, and utilized an oversized, archaic steel spring that demanded superhuman strength to arm. Firing it produced a brutal kick, frequently leaving Canadian troops with significant bruising across their shoulders after only one round. The Allied troops often cursed at its crude mechanism compared to the much sleeker American bazooka. And yet this is the grand contradiction of World War II weaponry. While Allied soldiers complained, the German forces, from the Wehrmacht regulars to the elite Waffen-SS, developed a deep, simmering hatred for this specific device. Why did this awkward contraption inspire such fear? Because, unlike every rocket-propelled anti-tank weapon of the era, the spring-launched PIAT did not betray the shooter's position. It was the perfect silent predator. In the hands of the Canadian Army, who deployed it with aggressive tactical innovation from the bitter street fighting in Ortona to the campaigns in the Scheldt, this crude piece of equipment became the invisible terror of the German Panzers. To truly understand why the PIAT represented such a distinctive threat, we must first clear up a major misunderstanding. When reviewing archival film from World War II, people often categorize the PIAT alongside the American Bazooka or the German Panzerschreck. Technically, however, they are radically different machines. The Bazooka and the Panzerschreck were rocket launchers. They were essentially tubes engineered to guide a rocket-propelled grenade. When the trigger was pressed, an internal rocket motor ignited, launching the projectile forward. The PIAT, conversely, was not a rocket launcher. It was a spigot-mortar. Its core was not a rocket engine but a colossal, powerful mainspring, a piece of bulky engineering that appeared better suited for a heavy truck suspension system than an infantry weapon. Its operational design was closer to a gigantic, explosive crossbow. Here's the crucial difference in its function. Inside the main tube, a heavy steel rod or spigot was held under tension by that immense spring. When the trigger was released, the spring drove the spigot forward with astonishing force into the tail assembly of the bomb. This impact detonated a propellant cartridge within the bomb's tail. The resulting blast launched the projectile while simultaneously kicking the heavy spigot backward to recompress the spring and ready the weapon for a follow-up shot. It sounds clever in theory, but in real combat it was incredibly difficult to operate. The spring was notoriously rigid. To manually set the weapon for the first shot required over 200 pounds 90 kg of brute force. This was not a weapon one could easily prepare while lying concealed in the mud. A soldier often had to stand up, place the butt plate on solid ground, and apply their entire body weight to engage the spring, a dangerous exposure in the middle of a firefight. What's more, the recoil was punishing. Because the weapon relied on a heavy mechanical spring and a captive internal explosion, the kickback was violent. Canadian veterans sometimes quipped that they deserved a medal just for enduring the firing of it. If a soldier failed to brace it tightly against the shoulder, the recoil could easily cause major bruising or even a dislocated collarbone. It was an infantry weapon that could harm its user almost as much as it harmed the enemy. However, this crude, shoulder-bruising mechanism provided the single tactical edge that the Germans learned to truly despise. Rocket launchers like the Panzerschreck produced a massive backblast. When a German soldier fired the Panzerschreck, a forceful jet of flame and superheated gas erupted from the rear of the launch tube. This backblast had two significant consequences. First, it made it totally impossible to fire the weapon from within a closed space like a room or a bunker without instantly killing the operator. Second, it kicked up a huge plume of dust and white smoke, instantly revealing the shooter's location to every enemy tank and sniper in the area. The PIAT had no backblast. Since the explosion occurred inside the bomb's tail and the energy was absorbed by the spring mechanism, there was no jet of flame escaping the rear. There was no giant puff of visible smoke. there was no bright muzzle flash. This meant a Canadian soldier could be concealed in tall brush, fire his round, and remain completely invisible. Even more crucially, as the war transitioned into the brutal, cramped urban ruins of Italian and Dutch cities, this design allowed the PIAT to be fired from inside small rooms, a capability German anti-tank teams absolutely lacked. While German engineers might have scoffed at the PIAT's dated design, the German tank crews on the receiving end quickly learned a sobering lesson. A crude weapon you cannot see is infinitely more dangerous. If the open fields of Normandy were perilous for their armor, the tight, debris-choked streets of European cities were a genuine death trap. And it was here, in the nightmarish close quarters of urban combat, that the PIAT truly came into its own, solidifying the German forces' genuine loathing for it. Nowhere was the strategic difference more apparent than during the Battle of Ortona, famously dubbed the Stalingrad of Italy. This was a brutal house-to-house, room-by-room engagement against elite German paratroopers. In this environment, German anti-tank teams faced a critical constraint. If a German soldier wanted to fire his Panzerschreck at an approaching Canadian Sherman tank, he was forced to step out into the street or at least stand in an open doorway. Why? Because of that lethal backblast. Firing the rocket from inside a small room meant the reflective pressure wave would instantly kill him or turn the space into a raging inferno. The Canadians, however, possessed the PIAT. Because the PIAT produced no backblast, a Canadian gunner could establish an effective ambush deep within a ruined structure. He could lie flat on a dusty floor, 5 meters back from a shattered window, completely hidden in the shadows. When a German Panzer rumbled down the street, blindly scanning with its turret, the Canadian could fire through the window frame without ever exposing himself. The tank crew would hear the deafening impact, feel the concussive explosion, but see nothing. No flash from the window, no rising smoke, just a silent, devastating blow from the dark. This singular capability transformed every window, every cellar grating, and every hole in a wall into a potential kill zone. It compelled German infantry to check every single building with agonizing thoroughness, slowing their movement to a crawl and severely damaging their morale. But the PIAT had another unusual feature that the Canadian forces brilliantly exploited: its trajectory. Most anti-tank munitions fire in a flat, high-velocity line. You aim directly at the tank and the rocket flies straight to it. The PIAT, being a spigot-mortar, launched a heavy projectile that traveled relatively slowly in a pronounced arc. At longer distances, the heavy bomb dropped steeply. While this made hitting a moving target at 200 meters remarkably difficult, in a city environment, it became a unique force multiplier. The PIAT could be used for indirect fire. Canadian troops quickly realized they could elevate the weapon and lob the anti-tank bombs over obstacles, much like a traditional mortar. Was a German machine gun team hunkered down behind a massive stone wall or a barricade of rubble. A flat-firing bazooka couldn't touch them, but a skilled PIAT gunner could lob a high-explosive bomb over the cover, dropping it right onto the enemy's position. This extraordinary versatility meant the PIAT was not merely an anti-tank weapon. It was essentially a pocket artillery piece. It could be used to blast open fortified doors, collapse walls to create mouse holes, a technique the Canadians perfected in Ortona to move between structures without entering the exposed streets, and systematically eliminate dangerous sniper nests. For the German defenders, this was intensely frustrating. They were trained to fight enemies they could see, or at least enemies whose weapons adhered to the established laws of ballistics. The PIAT followed no such rules. It could strike from enclosed positions without any warning, and it could rain lethal explosives from above solid cover. In the hands of the resourcefully aggressive Canadian infantry, this clumsy, spring-loaded gun transformed the urban landscape into a deadly labyrinth of invisible threats that the German heavy armor simply could not effectively counter. To fully comprehend the depth of the German forces' aversion to the PIAT, we must consider the perspective of a German tank operator. By 1944, the crews of the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS represented arguably the most seasoned armored veterans in military history. They operated by a rigid set of survival rules, developed and honed on the Russian front. Their core principle for survival was simple: immediate threat identification and overwhelming suppression. When a tank is ambushed, the crew's only chance is to instantly pinpoint the source of the gunfire and saturate that precise area with heavy machine gun fire and high-explosive shells. If they can spot the enemy, they can destroy him or, at minimum, keep his head down, preventing a follow-up shot. The PIAT fundamentally disrupted this ingrained survival instinct. In after-action reports and prisoner interrogations, captured German personnel frequently expressed a deep-seated frustration regarding Canadian anti-tank tactics. They vividly described the chilling sensation of fighting literal phantoms. When a PIAT round struck, the German crew often panicked, not primarily because of the damage itself, but because they had absolutely no idea where to pivot their turret. They would spray rounds wildly into the nearby ruins or hedgerow, pointlessly wasting valuable ammunition on empty shadows, while the Canadian gunner, concealed and entirely undetected, patiently reset his spring mechanism for the decisive second shot. This inability to immediately respond or retaliate fostered a constant state of paranoia. It stripped the German crews of their feeling of armored superiority. They weren't being defeated by a better machine, they were being hunted by an unseen force. But the animosity wasn't solely psychological. It was also brutally physical. The Germans might have mocked the PIAT's crude appearance, deriding it as a water pipe, but they could not dismiss its lethality. The PIAT fired a high-explosive anti-tank heat projectile utilizing a shaped charge. Despite the weapon's primitive launch method, the bomb itself was remarkably effective. It possessed the capacity to penetrate approximately 100 millimeters of armor plate. To properly frame this, the side armor of a Panther tank, Germany's premier medium tank, was only about 40 to 50 millimeters thick. Even the legendary Tiger I possessed only 80 millimeters of side armor. This implies that at close range, a mass-produced, stamped metal PIAT could punch a devastating hole straight through the flank of the German military's most advanced engineering marvels. When a PIAT bomb impacted, it didn't just explode on the surface. The shaped charge focused the immense blast energy into a focused, hypersonic jet of molten copper and superheated gas. This jet tore through the steel like a hot knife slicing through soft butter. Inside the tank, the effects were utterly gruesome. The jet would atomize molten metal and send hot spalling shrapnel from the tank's inner wall flying around the crew compartment, immediately igniting ammunition stores and fuel lines. The frustration also extended to the German infantry, whose role was to shield the tanks from enemy tank-hunting teams. They felt completely helpless. Their job was to protect the armor, but how do you protect a tank from a weapon that leaves no smoke or flash to trace? You cannot follow the path of the flight back to the bush where the Canadian is waiting. There is a well-documented account where a German commander, upon his surrender to Canadian forces, demanded to see the automatic anti-tank cannon that had decimated his column. When the Canadians showed him a PIAT, he reportedly refused to accept it. He felt deeply insulted that his technologically superior purpose-built machines had been vanquished by a simple spring-loaded tube. This was the fundamental source of the German hatred. It was a deep professional indignity. To them, the PIAT felt profoundly unfair. It was an assassin's weapon, silent, deadly, and infuriatingly successful in the broken, chaotic terrain of Western Europe. To fully appreciate why the Germans so profoundly feared the PIAT in Canadian hands, we must go beyond technical specifications and look at the soldiers who carried it. Because of the PIAT's fierce recoil, difficult manual cocking, and short practical range, it was emphatically not a weapon for the cautious soldier. It demanded absolute nerves of steel. No soldier embodied this rugged courage more completely than Private Ernest Smokey Smith of the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada. On a wet, rainy night in October 1944, Smith's unit had crossed the River Savio to establish a precarious bridgehead. They were isolated, heavily outnumbered, and dug into the muddy ground. Suddenly, the distinctive roar of Maybach engines shattered the silence. 3 German Panther tanks, supported by self-propelled artillery and a contingent of infantry, were advancing to crush the Canadian position. A Panther tank was a terrifying sight. Its frontal armor was nearly impervious to most Allied shoulder-fired weapons. To destroy it with a PIAT, you could not fire from 200 meters away. You couldn't fire from 100 meters away. You had to close the distance. You had to get suicidally close. As the lead Panther clanked down the road, sweeping the area with its machine guns, Smokey Smith did not retreat. He grabbed his PIAT. While his comrades held their breath, Smith waited in a roadside ditch. He allowed the 45-ton behemoth to approach until it was virtually on top of him, a distance of barely 30 feet 10 meters. At that point-blank range, the German crew had zero chance of spotting him. Smith rose quickly, leveled the heavy weapon, and pulled the trigger. Thump. The shaped charge round smashed into the Panther's side armor, crippling it instantly. But the fight was not yet won. 10 German infantrymen riding on the tank's hull scrambled off and immediately rushed Smith. Displaying incredible ferocity, he dropped the PIAT, snatched his Thompson submachine gun, and killed 4 of them, driving the rest back in confusion. Later that night, a second tank attacked the position. Smith waited again. Once more, he used the deep darkness and the PIAT's silent launch to his critical advantage. He fired a second round, forcing the second tank to hastily retreat. For his actions that night, Smokey Smith was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest decoration for valor in the British Commonwealth. His incredible story encapsulates the PIAT's ultimate contradiction. It was a weapon that soldiers personally hated using. It was bulky, it caused deep bruises, and its arming mechanism was often temperamental. But in the sheer chaos of a night ambush where absolute stealth was the only thing keeping the soldier alive, it was entirely irreplaceable. The Germans hated the PIAT because it fundamentally empowered individual infantrymen like Smokey Smith to stand their ground against a torrent of heavy armor. It turned a confident advance into a fearful, tentative crawl. We invite you to like this video and subscribe to the Winds of Thought channel for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of military history. As the fighting across Europe ceased in May 1945, the PIAT quickly began to disappear from service. It was rapidly superseded in the immediate post-war years by better designs, including the updated American Bazooka and later the exceptional Swedish Carl Gustaf. By any modern metric, the PIAT was an evolutionary dead end. It was heavy, it had a punishing recoil, and its manual cocking process was a soldier's nightmare under enemy fire. From a purely engineering standpoint, it was arguably one of the worst designs of the entire war. And yet, looking back through the necessary lens of history, we're left with an undeniable conclusion. It worked. The German Wehrmacht, a fighting force that took immense pride in its technological superiority, in its Tiger tanks, its V-2 rockets, and its Me-262 jet fighters, found itself continually frustrated by a primitive steel tube and a massive spring. They hated the PIAT because it denied them the one thing they relied on most, predictability. They could anticipate the path of a rocket. They could predict an anti-tank gun's general position, but they could never predict where a Canadian soldier with a PIAT might be silently hiding. For the Canadian Army, the PIAT became a symbol of their distinct approach to warfare. It was not elegant or glamorous. It was gritty, pragmatic, and demanded immense physical fortitude to deploy effectively. It was a weapon that required the user to hold their position, wait until they were close enough to see the whites of the enemy's eyes and stand firm. While American GIs could often engage from a distance with their rockets, the Canadian PIAT gunner had to get uncomfortably up close and personal. The true legacy of the PIAT is not found in technical manuals. It is found in the burnt-out chassis of Panther tanks in the streets of Ortona. It is found in the hedgerows of Normandy where German offensives were stalled by invisible assassins. And it is found in the Victoria Cross won by Smokey Smith, who proved that one lone soldier with a spring-loaded pipe and a deep reserve of courage could effectively halt a blitzkrieg. The Germans hated it because it violated all the rules of engagement. The Canadians used it because it secured critical victories. Ultimately, the silent nightmare earned its rightful place in history, not because it was the most refined weapon, but because it was the perfect tool for the critical moment.